Hi everybody and welcome to another edition of the We Are Mission podcast. I am delighted to be joined by Father Mike Freyne, who is a Hill Missionary. Thanks very much, Father Mike, for joining us.
You're welcome.
So, Father Mike, for people who don't know about you, tell us a wee bit about your background.
My background, I'm from Edinburgh, Sorton. Went to the Catholic primary school there. My dad died very young, but I'm the eldest of 7 children. We had a very Catholic upbringing in those days. I remember my dad used to unite all the altar boys in the house to teach them Latin, so we could reply to the Mass.
Oh.
And we were always up at Mass and on the altar serving before going to school early in the morning. But I went off to the junior seminary. In those days there were junior seminaries, so probably instead of going to secondary school, my secondary school was in Lochwinnock, which is now closed on the far side of Glasgow. I was there for 3 years, and then Vatican II came and they were changed the seminary training, so I did more A-levels and O-levels in Freshfield near Liverpool. I was there for 3 years, and that was a very open kind of system. And then with Mill Hill, the Scots and English, we went to Rosendal in Holland for 3 years. So I had 3 years, which was very, very good, because there was lots of, they say a lot of experimenting going on in the church in Holland, but we didn't see that much of it, but we were very involved in local parishes. But it was good because being 16, 17 years old, from Scotland, we're kind of conservative, then we had English, Scots, Belgian and Dutch all together, so quite a different cultural backgrounds, which is good for a missionary formation. And during that time we also had, in those days it was only 3 months, nowadays it's about a year, but we did 3 months, I did it in West Cameroon as an experience of the missions. And then we went to the Missionary Institute in London and did the final 3 years there, was 2 years studies and a year as a deacon in Chiswick in London. So that's the kind of background.
Yeah, so if we dial it back a wee bit, when you were at school, was being a priest something you always thought about, or did you have any other dreams or ambitions or different things that you might have wanted to be? Did you have different hobbies and things like that?
Besides wanting to be a fighter pilot, I didn't think too much about it. I must have, I had that kind of idea to go to the missions, and I used to go across to Rosyth when my grandparents used to live across by ferry. There was no bridge in those days, and spend a week there or something. And I remember being there, and a priest from Edinburgh Diocese, a Father John Gibbons. I remember I'd gone to school with my mum. He had been in Biafra in Nigeria during the Civil War, and he was there showing slides on the missions, and that was probably the first contact I had, and it kind of sparked something inside me that showed interest.
And so when you decided to take up your vocation, was there anything that you found surprising?
I was really just a small kid, Mill Hill probably had the biggest advert in the Catholic papers or something. And I wrote away without even saying to my parents. And then one day a priest from Mill Hill turned up. My dad said, "Did you write? There's a priest here from Mill Hill." And things just kind of devolved.
And in terms of things that inspire your vocation, is there any particular saint or saints that would inspire your vocation?
Traditional saints, I would imagine, would be Saint Joseph when I was young, and to do with confirmation and things like that. Nowadays I would look to people like Don Oscar Romero, kind of more modern day saints, people that have struggled and fought for the side of justice because of their faith.
And what about scripture passages? Is there any kind of defining scripture passage for you?
I always liked the one, and I used it at my ordination, from Luke, when Jesus goes into the temple and he kind of puts forward his mission project, from the prophet Isaiah, that he was anointed, and then he comes out to justice, and ends with to announce the year of grace. And when we fully understand that, you kind of understand that this is really to announce the kingdom of God, and I always find that very inspiring.
In terms of the term vocation, what does the term, if you're trying to explain it to somebody, what does the term vocation mean to you?
Vocation is always automatically you think of being called. I remember once being on a retreat with all the priests and nuns in the diocese in Brazil, and this was a question that was put to us by the retreat person. Why have you got a vocation? What happened? And I was kind of scared to speak. I think, and this is it won't be right and everything. And I remember saying, look, you hear about you've been called. Well, I didn't hear any voices in my head or anything, but I'm basically a priest because I'm Mike, and this is the way Mike is and should be. Because I'm this way, that this is my vocation, and I thought I've made a mug of myself. And then my bishop spoke next, and he says, "Well, I'm the same as Mike. I'm a priest, a bishop, because I am who I am." And you get confirmation of your vocation throughout your life, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Just in terms of going back to the Mill Hills, I know you said that you saw their advert and stuff like that in the paper, but what made Mill Hill kind of stand out to you when you eventually kind of got immersed in it? What's special about the Mill Hill missionaries?
I would say that in those days when I went to Mill Hill, my reasons for going would be totally different from when I was ordained or nowadays, because I kind of vaguely remember that I wanted to become a Mill Hill missionary because I believe I would go to Africa and I could sleep with a lion. I could go there and build a huge big cathedral in the middle of the jungle, and these are the kind of things that I wouldn't dream of wanting to do nowadays. But I like Mill Hill's proposal. We're not a religious order, we're secular priests. We don't have to live in community. We go out to serve the local church, and when we feel that the local church can manage on its own, we hand over and we move on to the next challenge, if you want. So and when we are there, we're at the total disposition of the local bishop, the local church. So he doesn't have to ask a superior provincial, can I move Mike to another parish? No, we're there just like secular priests working for the local church. And at that time, that was the way that we worked. We would never, in those days, have thought of accepting vocations from, let's say, if we were in Africa, from African dioceses. We train people to become priests in their own diocese. So Mill Hill, that's changed a wee bit nowadays, of course, because the world situation has changed. But very much because we're at the service of the local church.
Mm-hmm. And so, tell us a wee bit about where your vocation has taken you. Like, when were you ordained, and where were you posted to after that?
In Mill Hill, we have what I believe is quite a good system. When you're ordained a deacon and take your perpetual promises, it's all on the same day. Before that, you normally get a piece of paper from the General Council from Mill Hill, and there's a couple of questions. Put in order of priority where you'd like to be sent on your first mission. So you put 1, 2, 3, and then would you want to do further studies, and would you be willing to work at home? And so I put 1, Brazil, missed the second one out, and put the third one, Sudan, and then just put no. And luckily we were only 3 ordained. I think all 3 of us actually got our first mission. So that's why I was sent out to Brazil.
Mm-hmm. And when you got there, like, what was your overall first impression of being on the mission in Brazil?
Well, I'd been in Africa for 3 months, which was extremely in the middle of the jungle and that. When we went to Brazil, we were taking over parishes from the Carmelites. In the beginning, they were way in the interior. Well, in Brazilian terms, not that far, but 1,500 miles. And they were kind of big parishes, 30 churches in a parish and things like that. I only worked in that kind of area for a year, and then I moved more to the urban apostolate. But it was very, very different. But first of all, the heat was totally different, and the culture it was totally different from Scotland, of course.
Mm-hmm. And how were you received when you went to the? How were you received in Africa, and how were you received in Brazil?
In Africa, we were there as students, and we were always welcome. But it was a different kind of church. In Brazil, they need priests definitely, and something like one priest for every 40,000. You know, if you've got 30 communities, you only get mass once a month if they're lucky. So there was a great need, and we spent a good 3 months just beginning to learn the language, and then even then I would go into around about the 8th or 10th week. I would go say mass in the wee hospital chapel, and you just read it. You couldn't really preach or anything, but you would just say mass for them, and I'm sure the pronunciation and everything was terrible, but they would always tell you that you're speaking well, you know. But they were very, very welcoming. There was never any problem that way. Mm. Even and they don't have that big. It's not like in Africa. In Brazil, there's a lot of white and a lot of black people and brown people. There's a very interracial thing. So you weren't standing out as a foreigner so much.
Mm-hmm. Just in terms of Brazil, what were some of the areas you were posted to, and what were some of the challenges you faced in those different areas?
I was in the interior for just 9 months, which is very rural, and of course a lot of them, especially the youth, once they got to secondary school, were really heading to the main towns. So it was huge, big ranches, and a lot of these were people in the military who were extremely rich, and this was just at the end of the dictatorship, so you had to be very careful with what you said. It was also the time of the Latin American conference in Puebla, where they made the option for the poor, and I was very, very had taken part in one of the big meetings, 10 days, with the bishop that lived in the place where we learned Portuguese, and top liberation theologians were at this place. So I was very enthusiastic about this option for the poor. And I found that the bishop there had, let's say, more connections with the military and wasn't really interested. So in the end, we mutually agreed that I should move on. So I checked with Mill Hill, and they said, go ahead. And I moved to where this first bishop was, who was far more prophetic. And that was more urban and coast, a very small diocese, and a narrow corridor of the sea on one side, and the mountains on the other. But you had a mixture of some rural areas up in the mountains, and you had there was a new tarmac road, and at the end of it they built a nuclear reactor, and there was shipbuilding yard and a naval college and an oil terminal. So it was beginning to become quite an industrial place. At the same time you had small little fishing villages, and then when I first arrived, the big hotels, international hotels, were beginning to invade the land of poor farmers and getting all kinds of illegal documents to throw these farmers out and build these massive big hotels which now exist right on the beach and everything. So I arrived at that kind of moment, and at the same time the church was becoming very much for this option for the poor. And where I arrived, we were actually, the southern part of the diocese was a vicariate of a diocese up in the mountains, and the northern part of the diocese belonged to a part of Rio de Janeiro. But my bishop was Vicar General of both of them, and acting, functioning as a bishop as if it was a diocese, and that's what the plan of the bishop was. So I was only there about 7 or 8 months, and then we were all called up and we told the Pope has made us a diocese, and Vital was to be the first bishop. So we were right at the beginning. We were only 12 foreign priests. We were only foreign priests. We had no indigenous priests at all. So it was a great experience to be part of that.
Mm-hmm. And just in terms of, you were talking about the people there getting put off their land for hotels and stuff like that to be built. How did you feel like that you had to represent them sometimes and go to bat for them, defend them?
The basic kind of way of working, I would say, in Brazil, because you've got so few priests, it's very Eucharistic centred, but you're in most places you only get Mass once a month. I would say Mass twice in each community. But your basic thing is coming together once a week in many groups. So in the first parish I had 20 groups to reflect on the Bible, so they call them Bible circles. You would reflect on the Bible, and there'd be lots of questions to how do you apply this to your life, and all these questions about the land being taken away from the landowners, people who had been on the land for over 80, 100 years. So you would discuss this, and in my case, because it was such a big problem, we got a Catholic agency to pay for a lawyer to come once a week. I think we had that for about 3 years, and then it was renewed. And this lawyer would come from Rio, and we would get these old farmers together, and he would teach them the law and what was behind the law. And then when it came to the crunch, he would defend them in the law courts. So I was only behind the scenes, if you want.
Mm-hmm. And you actually touched upon liberation theology. For people who don't know what that is, can you maybe explain a wee bit about that and possibly give us your own kind of personal insight and what you feel about it?
I think liberation theology is one thing. If you read some of the famous textbooks, and then they start talking about the Marxist analysis and all this, 98% of the people haven't a clue what you're talking about. The liberation theology, as it's actually lived, is basically putting your faith into practice. And from a Latin American point of view, it's reading the Bible and understanding the Bible from the point of view of poor people, where the system is, they're poor because of the system, the economic structures. And liberation theology is basically that you from reflecting on the Bible, you try and put what God wants of us into practice in our daily lives. And it means that simple things, for instance, before liberation theology, if you had a parish, you would probably give priority to the biggest church and where the wealthy lived. Whereas with liberation theology, it was from the point of view of the poor. So in my case, if I had 12 churches, they all got 2 masses a month. It didn't depend if you had 15 people or 200, or if you were a very wealthy part or very, very poor. Everybody was treated as an equal.
In terms of when you were on mission, what were some of the things that you found personally challenging? And of the things that you did find challenging, where did you draw strength from to tackle them?
I think every day there were new challenges, because you were doing things that they were totally different from your seminary training. Where I think when after Puebla, this meeting of the bishops of Latin America, they made this option for the poor, and I did a 10-day course with bishops and liberation theology. It changed my whole view of the Bible, and then reflecting with the Bible with poor people, you began to understand the Bible in quite a different way as well. Sure, your seminary training kind of more academic helped that a wee bit. So that was a big challenge to kind of change your view in that sense. I think also we were very used to the European Church, very much parish centred, and it was kind of hierarchical structure. I think it was a good challenge, but where you try to say, well, the parish is a community of communities, and in each community they have the parish council or community council, and the priest was just the coordinator, the one that celebrated the Eucharist, and you were just one of the cogwheel of the group. And at times, even though canonically the parish priest could determine what happens in the parish council, it didn't work out in practice like that. People all had their say, and they all came to the joint conclusion. And I think that was the challenge, because certain areas you went to, they had what we would have had in those old days, that if the priest said something, that was it. And sometimes that was deeply ingrained. So I once had a community where I said, no, but we are the community and we make decisions together. So we agreed that every time I would say, I think we should, they would shout back at me, the priest doesn't decide here. And at times it was quite annoying in those first few months, but after about 8 months, the people understood that, no, we all have our say in the way that the community is going to work. So that was quite a big challenge. Mm. And then there were other things. I'd never worked with pigs, and if I had a cooperative with animals, I was never good with animals. You had one day to clean the pigs and get eggs from the hens and all this kind of. So if you were part of that wee cooperative, you were there and mucking in with everybody else. Those were kind of interesting challenges as well.
Mm-hmm. And times that were difficult when you were on the missions, where did you draw strength from?
For me, it's always been, I think, the Eucharist. And since we had one or two of our communities had 150, 200 people at Mass, but most of them were, let's say, 50 or so. There were small groups, and they didn't have the formality that, the structure that we kind of tend to have in Europe. So I always found the way that the people participated in celebrating the Eucharist was always a great source of strength.
In terms of your time spent on the missions, do you have any kind of standout memories or stories that you always come back to? Maybe ones that you share with your parish or the local school?
Oh, there's lots of them. The friendships that you make. I think perhaps one that stands out for me was, and it's not that long ago, that one of the big changes in my time was that the drugs, the dealers, the traffickers have taken over, and people, my house was quite open, and some group had used it for a birthday party, and the kids have gone home, not bad, they didn't have any bad intentions, but they would say, oh, we were in Father's house, and they might have saw a camera, or they might have saw we had a TV, and the drug dealers thought this was an easy source of money. And one day I had a nurse working with me, she had just left, and the next thing I had a knock on the gate, and I had a new neighbour, and this voice was saying, I'm your new neighbour, the baby's very, very, very ill, we need to loan you a car to take the baby quick to the hospital. And it all sounded very true, so opened the gate, and the next thing I was thrown on the ground and a revolver at my head, and there was just a 14, 15-year-old kid and probably one about 20. And they locked me, but there was no lock. They put me in the bathroom, and the older kid had a revolver, and they started to just clean out. I could hear them taking everything out of the house and putting it at the gate. And I would be knocking on the doors thinking, how do I get out? Because the bathroom window wasn't big enough. Thinking, well, I've got to try and get out somehow. And I kept saying, I need my medication, I need to this. And the old one would say, keep quiet. And then I could hear them talking, and the old one says, if he doesn't keep quiet, I'll kill him. And the younger one was saying, no, you can't kill the priest, you can't kill the priest, but killing the priest, bad luck. And I remember, idiot that I am, behind the door saying, aye, big bad luck, don't kill the priest. And then when they weren't looking, and I'd not long done surgery on my ankle, I was still using a walking stick, but I remember when you're really in danger, where you get the energy from, that when they were at the gate, I managed to get out the toilet, out the window, up onto the roof, and crossed 3 roofs of houses to manage to get down, and they called the police and all this kind of thing. But that was quite frightening. But it's amazing where you get the resources from to recover. So that was something, and in the beginning we didn't have it. My electricity was from a factory that used to be in front of me, and sometimes they forget, they work late at night and they turn off the mains, and my electricity went out, and I'd think, well, someone's cut the electricity. And it was quite a violent place, and you think they're coming to the parish at night, and you'd sit on the roof just waiting with the dog, wondering, is this going to be the night that they're coming?
Jeez, that beggars belief, some of that. And it's quite a common theme that in any missionaries I've interviewed. At some point they've had a gun to their head, regardless of what order or congregation they're from. It's I don't think people realise some of the kind of sacrifices and some of the kind of fear sometimes that's just involved in being on the missions.
Yeah, and these kind of things, these were drug dealers. There was, in the beginning, there was more a structured kind of violence, which was more your telephone. You knew the police were listening to your telephones, and your mail was being opened and things like that.
Yeah. And what about in terms of looking back? What are some of the kind of positives that you remember? The kind of maybe the impact that yourself and fellow missionaries have made in Brazil. What were some of the things that you would consider success stories, things that you're proud of?
Well, I think the big success story is that even though Latin America, Brazil, has very few priests compared to Europe, it is a Brazilian church. The hierarchy, there's 360 odd bishops. They're really, fairly united, far more organised than probably in Europe. They've got their own priests coming up now. It's not normal to meet many European priests, certainly not the majority in a diocese, perhaps a wee bit up in the Amazon where there's a big shortage of priests. I mean, there is a shortage of priests compared to here. I think you've got one priest for every 3,000 people here. It's something like one for 40,000 in Brazil. But they're extremely well organised, and I think that's, we can say, the Dutch and the Portuguese, especially them that came, they really helped the church grow, and they laid the foundations.
Mm. So how long in total were you in Brazil?
I was there for just 30 years. 30
years. And so, having been there for 3 decades on the mission, you would probably be kind of cognizant of what are the kind of important qualities or characteristics that a missionary needs when he goes out on mission, or her, sorry, him or her goes out on mission. What would you say are the most important qualities or characteristics?
I think you must always be open to other cultures, willing to listen. That's a big thing. Certainly in the early days, people used to go out and we were there to tell them, how to believe in God. Nowadays, I think we've got to go there and listen and understand how they see God in their lives, and be able to adapt to quite a lot. You have to be willing to do a lot of things that you might not particularly want to do, and flexible. But I think the big thing is that missionaries, you're going out, but to be open.
In terms of as well, what would you say are the main positives of being a missionary?
Some people might jump and say you get to see the world. I must admit, I never was a tourist. We went to be missionaries to work, and I would say one of the benefits is that wherever you do go and work, that's your family until you're asked to move on, and then you have a new family. I think it's just like here, as a priest, you'll find whichever area you're in, the parishioners will always kind of accept you as part of their family, and when you're in need or if you're ill, they will rally round. I think that's something, and then you begin to see some of the fruits. I think that quite often you don't see too many fruits, but over a long period of time you begin to see some of the benefits.
And conversely then, what are some of the negative things about being a missionary?
Obviously you leave home, so I can honestly say that when I came home after 30 years, I didn't expect that, I didn't imagine that I'm going to be doing things every day with my brothers and sisters because they've got their own families, their own lives, and they've had them for 30 years, so they can't expect me all of a sudden to be part of it. So that's something I think you miss very much.
And we obviously spoke earlier on about how you would describe the term vocation. How would you explain the term mission? What does the term mission mean to you?
Mission, from I suppose a Catholic point of view, is that we're going out to preach the kingdom of God. Preach in the sense showing by the way we live, not so much verbally preaching, but showing by the way we live what it's like to be a Christian, in the hope that people become interested and want to be part of it. So it's kind of a calling that you have to put in practice this project.
Mm-hmm. In terms of, we know nowadays we talk quite a lot about lay missionaries. How do you think people can be a lay missionary? What is the kind of best way that they can live out their mission?
I think they don't value enough the vocation that people have to be lay missionaries. I was lucky when I was in seminary. The volunteer missionary movement was just starting in the UK, and I was very friendly and helped quite a bit with that in the beginning. It was a good experience. In Brazil, you felt very much that, I mean, it was the Church of the Laity. They were doing all the things, and far more perhaps than here, because I had nuns that did my weddings and my baptisms. I had lay people that did my weddings and baptisms. So that was put into practice. But I think anywhere we go in the world, if we want to live our baptism, if we're willing to live our values, it's going to bring a bit of conflict. It's going to put us into a bit of people might not like what we say, and because of our faith, we don't need to be, kind of Bible pushers and that kind of thing. But I think if we really want to walk in the footsteps of Jesus, then we are going to disrupt a wee bit people. But you do that as a lay person, and I think that's one of the dangers nowadays, is that Pope Francis calls it clericalism very much. That there's a danger that we give lay people jobs in the church and we almost clericalise them. They should be in as lay people, as ministries that belong to lay people, as co-responsible for the mission of the church.
Now, as somebody who has spent 30 years in Brazil, do you go back quite often? Do you still have good friends and connections there?
Well, if you're there 30 years, then your life is very major part of your life is there. I've tried to go back every year, although it's getting more and more expensive, although you have very little expenses when I'm there. And normally I go in winter here because it's easy to get a supply just at weekends. And I go back, but I don't get too involved on purpose, because it's a new time, different people, and things have changed radically. There was a different bishop and a different view of church. Just now there is a new bishop, and he's going back to more this Church of Pope Francis, of the kind of the synod and that, and he's actually asked to see me, so that might be interesting. But I go at my age more to rest than anything else. But I meet people, and I say Mass normally on a Thursday during the week, so that I'm not taking people away from their communities, because they're all community leaders, so you don't want to take them when they should be in their community Mass and leading. Take them away, so I normally say Mass during the week, so that they're not missed.
And your last visit, I believe, was very eventful. Can you share a wee bit about that with us?
Yeah, it was meant to be an important one, but the house where I stay is only 2 minutes walk from the beach, and I was out every morning. I go out very early, around 6, and I was out and it was just a kind of beach track, but at the end there were some nice houses, but it's a dead end. You can only drive about 10 miles an hour, and only half of it is tarmacked, and only enough for one car. And I was out on my own, and the next minute I was hit by a car, and I was thrown up in the air and came down and completely smashed his windscreen. So he ended up taking me to, I insisted on going to the local hospital, not to a private hospital, and I found I had 2 cracked ribs or broken ribs and a punctured lung. But I'd been on the Health Council for over 12 years, and I'd been one of the ones that signed to have this hospital built, and I was hoping that someone would recognise me, and luckily someone did. So I was only in the hospital for 5 days, so they processed things pretty quickly, and everything that I would have needed there, intravenous stuff, it was all given to me to be done in the house. But it wasn't, it was a very difficult time, yeah.
Yeah, and I can imagine are you fully on the mend now?
Oh, I am fine now, fine for this, yeah.
Well, you buried the lead a wee bit there because you spoke about you had help to get that hospital built. Tell us some of the things that the Mill Hill Missionary, the kind of legacy that the Mill Hill Missionaries have left in Brazil. What are some of the things that they've done?
Yeah, when I say help build it, wasn't financially. I was on the board. It depends on the Mill Hill Missionary. As I say, we normally tend to build up the diocesan, what the diocese asks for us. I was very much into building up communities, so I think over the 40 years via different agencies here at home and in Europe, we must have bought 40 plots of land, built 40 community centres, churches, formation centre, things like that. So we've helped build the infrastructure. We never in Mill Hill put it in Mill Hill's name, it always goes in the diocesan name, so we don't have anything of ours there. So it's easy to hand on, that's up to the bishop. I would say Mill Hill help an awful lot with priestly formation. We wouldn't, in Brazil, we wouldn't be involved in seminaries. We were only 12 priests at the very most in Brazil, but we always got, let's say, the students would come and stay with us for a year to see if they had a priestly vocation. The younger priests would normally be sent to us as well. That kind of thing. But most of Mill Hill, I would say, but certainly in my case, was the formation of youth, formation of lay leaders. I was very much involved with the formation of what they call nowadays citizenship, which is trying to train people to get actively involved in changing structures. So a lot of trade union leaders were formed by us. When I think about it, these were guys that couldn't even speak properly, and they became local councillors, trade union leaders, even ministers in the federal government eventually. But it started off, Saturday morning formation with a prayer, a Bible study, and then we would have people to come in and give them a more kind of political formation, not in a party politics sense. It was quite amazing to see how all that grew,
Mm-hmm. When you have such an impact on people's lives, whether it's just through giving them somewhere to stay or somewhere to congregate, or whether you've helped them become like a leader, how important do you think that is for giving people a really positive view of the Catholic Church and what it does, if for example they might not have had in the past, or maybe they were neutral?
I think in the case of my area, the Catholic Church had a lot of credibility. In my area, my last parish, it was kind of all swampy area, and people, when they were building the nuclear reactor and all that, had come from the northeast, and they just set up house because they didn't have any money at the banks of the swamp and the river. And Avibras, one of the big Brazilian arms factories, was going to build a big factory there, and they literally had bulldozers there to knock all these houses down. But my bishop came and sat in front of the bulldozer, and eventually the police said, you can't park. It was kind of a motorway. It's not our kind of motorway, but it was legally a motorway, and the police would come and say, you can't park in the motorway, and then push them back a couple of hundred yards, and my bishop would go and sit in front of that. Well, that saved people hundreds of families, their homes. When you see a bishop involved in that kind of thing, when the shipbuilding yard had 18,000 men, and they're being threatened because the owners of Singapore weren't paying and things like that, to call attention, they would sit on the main road, and I would go along, and you just take part, and just the fact that the priest was there supporting them, and all they wanted was the helicopter to pass over from the national news, film them, and that was it. That's all they wanted to be on the national TV to say, call attention to our problem. They're not paying our wages. But the fact that the Catholic Church was there, gave a lot of sense to a lot of people's lives, and even people that weren't connected with the church. And I would say even there was a huge island off the coast, and there was it used to be a big political prison, and afterwards it was all the worst criminals from Rio de Janeiro that were put there. And there were about 3,000, I think, and only meant to hold about 400. But the priest would go across, and he would go around with 2 nuns for 2 days, say mass and everything. But officially he was meant to go around with armed police, but he never had to do that. The prisoners looked after him. No one would touch the priest. He was their contact with the outside world. He was the one that they could depend on. They could depend on the church.
And just in terms of, we've touched on a wee bit about the Mill Hill Missionaries themselves. What's the current situation for Mill Hill Missionaries throughout the world?
I don't know the statistics now, but when I was ordained, I think we were about 1,300. We're nowhere near that now. And I would take a guess, but don't quote me, but I think probably in the last 30 or 40 years, we've had no vocations, people ordained in the UK, Europe or America. But we have constantly about 9 to 12 every year ordained, but they're all in Cameroon, Zaire, Uganda, Kenya, the Philippines, India. They're all coming up. But then if you're born and you're from Uganda, then you know that as a missionary you're going to be sent out. So just as we were sent out, they might be going to Cameroon or they might be going to Kenya, but they don't stay in their own country as a rule, as far as I understand. They are missionaries.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the church in Brazil and the church in Scotland, what are the kind of main differences that you've seen, and what are kind of some of the similarities, perhaps?
Lots of similarities, because the basics are fundamental. I think everything we're hearing about just now about synodality and Pope Francis, I kind of smile because we have a bit of difficulty in Scotland. We don't like change so much, and the whole idea of perhaps sharing mission is a bit strange. But I kind of smile because we've been doing that in Latin America for the last 40 years, 35 years. That's the way of life. I can't think, and I don't think I've ever come across a parish in Brazil that doesn't have a parish council. I don't think the bishop would allow it. That would be, and it's a real functioning parish council. That's a simple thing. Then you'd have a diocesan lay commission and these things that perhaps we're trying to introduce slowly. I think that's a difference. I think also there's a difference in which we see the priest or the church. I remember once we were having a meeting, 17 or 18 priests, all the priests in the diocese, and it's like everywhere else. You've been there all day and come 4 o'clock and you've got 2 or 3 hours in the car. Everybody's looking at their watch, wanting to get home, and I remember everybody just said yes to some major decision. I remember the bishop saying, "Wait a minute, let's get this straight. If we get this wrong, then we're all to blame, not the bishop, we're all to blame. And if we get it right, then it's congratulations to all of us. It's our church." And I think that's, and that was the same in the parish. If the parish council comes together, if it doesn't work, don't blame the parish priest. It's our decision, so, let's think it through.
Mm-hmm. Father, you've got a really obviously good working knowledge of Missio Scotland down throughout the years and things like that. Why would you say it's important for people to support the work of Missio Scotland and its partners in the Pontifical Mission Societies?
Might think that perhaps it's less important as countries develop and they begin to have some of their own priests and that. But in fact, it's one of the reasons probably why we need to support them more. In that, when I was ordained, I was from a not a rich family by any means, but I always had friends and schools that could support me financially, even to put my food on the table. Whereas the priests that you're having now are coming normally from poor tribal families. They don't have the background and resources that we have, and therefore they need financially far more support. So in one sense, the money that we have and that we offer via Missio to these dioceses is far more important now than it was in the past. If they want to be kind of more independent, if you want, at the same time they're going to be a wee bit more dependent on money from here, because they just don't have those resources just now. And we've got to perhaps allow them to make the decisions, with our money. And I think it's even more important because no matter how difficult life is here, in general, with some exceptions obviously, our lives are still more comfortable than the majority in third world countries, in developing countries. And it's good for us to learn that it's part of our, what would you call it, Catholic DNA that we share. We do it almost without thinking. Even if we've not got much, we still try and share. It's part of our Catholic faith.
Well, one thing I wanted to ask you about, I don't know if there's something that you experienced when you were in Brazil, but there seemed to be a kind of rise of like Pentecostal churches and things like that. How did the Catholic Church kind of, deal with that? The potential of kind of losing parishioners to some of these other churches.
I don't think they have actually dealt with it. I can only say, honestly, that of all the years I've been there, I only know of one person that left my parish to go to a Pentecostal church, and to be quite honest, we were quite happy that he went, because he was just really a problem. But I would say that in other places, and even round about us, lots of small Pentecostal independent churches grew up. You didn't have much ecumenical contact. There was a wee bit in Brazil with the Baptists, and oddly enough with the Mormons. But other than that, most of these churches are kind of new churches, independent churches. And unfortunately, there normally is, it's very much, in most of them, you come along to pray, and their pastor, you'll get more graces from God the more money you give. So you find that some of these evangelical churches, their let's say bishop or leader lives in the United States, big mansion. They have big TV companies, bought over a lot of TV companies in Brazil. So some of them have an awful lot of finance, and yet their people live in poverty.
And obviously, your time in mission would have been full on. Brazil's a big country. You'd have been covering a lot of area and things like that. Did you get any time to relax? And when you did, what were some of the things that you liked to do? Mondays.
Mondays was generally accepted in the diocese, and that was no problem for the people. Monday, nothing happened in the parish as a rule, and that was your kind of day off. And because I lived on the coast, people used to say, "You're not going to Rio." I think, why take a bus 2.5 hours to Rio, spend a lot of money, expensive, and the possibility to be mugged or even get a bullet. And half a mile away, we've got over 360 islands and beautiful beaches and that. So I spent my time running at the beach, and we had canoes. One or two of us would go out in canoes and that. And just with the people, we just take the pickup down and spend the whole day there.
Fantastic. And just a nice little segue to our very, very final question. Can you tell people something about yourself that they might not know? And to be honest, I think you told me of something about yourself that I didn't know when I came in. So,
what people don't know about me. One of the things my bishop once said to me was, "Mike, you're an open book. Everybody knows about your life." I don't think I keep anything intentionally secret. They don't. Can't think of anything.
well, it's certainly not intentionally secret, but I didn't realise that you were such a fine photographer. Tell us a wee bit about how you get into photography.
Photography began I think in the junior seminary. They used to have what they called a green room, and it was a dark room really. And a guy that lived round the road was in the Navy, and he'd built one of these enlargers, going back a long time ago, from a vacuum cleaner. And then with the front part of the bellows of a Kodak camera, they put together an enlarger. And I learned to develop black and white photographs there, because in those days it was film. And that went on. Did a wee bit of it, but it was very expensive in those days. I must have been nearly ordained, or probably ordained before I got my first camera. And then in Brazil, I did a wee bit of it, but there was more in view of taking slides. We used slides in those days to bring back to show to school. It was really not really as a hobby, and as I say, it was very expensive as well. And then because we were living on the coast and in kind of swampy areas, the humidity, so there was a lot of fungus on your negatives on your slides. So it was only once I came back here that I began to take it up a wee bit, you know.
Mm-hmm. And what's some of your favourite things to photograph? Do you like still life? Do you like nature? Do you like people?
I do mostly wildlife up in the Scottish mountains or islands, a bit of scenery, but recently a lot of white-tailed eagles and ospreys, but it's to the stage that an osprey's not good enough. You've got to catch it with taking a fish out of the loch, you know.
All right, Mike, thank you very much for being so generous with your time and for sharing your experience of being a missionary and your time in the missions.
Thanks for coming along.
Thank you. Missio Scotland is the Scottish branch of the Pontifical Mission Societies, the Pope's official charity for overseas mission. To learn more about the work of Missio Scotland, you can visit our website www.missioscotland.com. You can like us on Facebook, www.facebook.com/Missio Scotland. You can also follow us on Twitter, Missio_Scotland, and on Instagram, Missio Scotland. If you would like to donate to Missio Scotland, visit www.missioscotland.com/donate. You can also call us on 01236 449 774 or send donations to Missio Scotland, 4 Laird Street, Coatbridge, ML5 3LJ. Please keep us in your prayers. Thank you and God bless.